Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Between 1892 and 1954, more than 12 million immigrants passed through Ellis Island, the gateway to America. They came from across the globe, Italy, Russia, Ireland, Germany, and beyond, driven by dreams of freedom, opportunity, and a better life. But while Ellis Island represented hope for many, it was also a place of fear, scrutiny, and heartbreak. Some stepped onto American soil and never looked back. Others were detained, deported, or devastated by the realization that the American dream was far more complicated than they had imagined. Today, Ellis Island stands as both a symbol and a question. Footage of its halls, now quiet museums lined with suitcases, photographs, and registry books, remind us of its profound role in shaping the United States. Just offshore, the Statue of Liberty holds her torch high, echoing the famous promise inscribed at her base. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. But how many found freedom, and at what cost? Ellis Island is more than just a historical site. It is a mirror reflecting America's core identity. It tells the story of how the country became a nation of immigrants, forged from a mosaic of languages, religions, and cultures. It also exposes the tensions that have always existed between welcoming the outsider and guarding the gates. The medical inspections, language barriers, and legal interviews were the first tests of a long and uncertain journey toward becoming American. This video will explore how Ellis Island helped shape the soul of the United States, not just in terms of demographics, but in ideals, conflicts, and the ongoing debate over who belongs. We'll uncover the human stories behind the statistics, examine the policies that defined entry, and look at how the island's legacy still echoes in today's immigration debates. Because Ellis Island isn't just about the past, it's about who we are now and who we strive to become. Before Ellis Island became the iconic gateway for millions of immigrants, immigration to the United States followed a much more decentralized and informal path. In the early 19th century, most immigrants arrived through various ports along the eastern seaboard, with New York City quickly becoming the busiest. Between 1855 and 1890, the primary processing center in New York was Castle Garden, located at the southern tip of Manhattan. Unlike the later Ellis Island, Castle Garden was operated by the state of New York, not the federal government. Castle Garden welcomed over 8 million immigrants during its operation. Most came from Northern and Western Europe, places like Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia, seeking escape from famine, political upheaval, and economic hardship. Processing was relatively swift and lenient. There were no federal immigration laws governing who could enter beyond basic exclusions, such as bans on criminals, the extremely ill, or the mentally unfit. However, by the late 1800s, several factors pushed the U.S. toward creating a more centralized, federalized system. For one, immigration was exploding in volume. Steamship travel had become faster and cheaper, making the journey to America more accessible than ever. Simultaneously, the demographics were shifting. More immigrants were now coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, Italians, Poles, Jews, and others, bringing different languages, customs, and religions. These groups often faced more resistance and suspicion from native-born Americans, many of whom feared cultural and economic displacement. At the same time, reports of corruption, inefficiency, and overcrowding at Castle Garden were mounting. With increasing pressure to regulate who could enter the country and how, the federal government decided it could no longer leave immigration solely in the hands of individual states. Thus, in 1890, Castle Garden was closed, and the federal government took over responsibility for immigration. A new, purpose-built immigration station was planned, one that could handle the growing flood of arrivals with more rigorous medical inspections, legal reviews, and documentation. The chosen location was a small island in New York Harbor. That island would soon become Ellis Island, a name that would define the immigrant experience for generations to come. Ellis Island officially opened its doors as the United States' first federal immigration station on January 1, 1892. On that cold New Year's Day, a steamship from Liverpool pulled into New York Harbor, and among its passengers was a 15-year-old girl from County Cork, Ireland, Annie Moore. With her two younger brothers by her side, Annie became the very first immigrant to be processed through Ellis Island, a symbolic beginning for what would become the gateway for over 12 million people. The original Ellis Island facility was a modest wooden structure, hastily built and perched on a small man-made island in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty. The building featured a central hall for processing, dormitories, medical inspection areas, and administrative offices. Despite its basic construction, it was designed to handle thousands of people a day, accommodating the flood of immigrants arriving in the booming industrial age. However, the early optimism surrounding Ellis Island was quickly tested. On the DID, night of June 15, 1897, a devastating fire swept through the complex, reducing the original wooden buildings to ash. Fortunately, there were no casualties among immigrants or staff, but all of the station's immigration records dating back to 1855, those from Castle Garden and early Ellis Island, were destroyed in the blaze. Rather than shut the station down, the federal government saw the fire as a chance to build something stronger and more permanent. Over the next few years, Ellis Island was rebuilt with red brick, limestone, and steel. The new main building, completed in 1900, featured grand vaulted ceilings, ornate tile work, and a vast registry room, or Great Hall, where thousands of hopeful newcomers would line up daily to face inspection. It was built not just to process immigrants efficiently, but to impress upon them the seriousness and order of the nation they were entering. As immigration numbers surged, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe, the island expanded rapidly. Additional buildings were added, including hospitals, detention centers, and quarantine facilities. Ferry services were increased and infrastructure modernized. At its peak, Ellis Island processed up to 5,000 immigrants a day, each one facing a long line of questions, examinations, and uncertainty. From its humble beginnings to its transformation into a bustling port of entry, Ellis Island grew into the beating heart of America's immigration system. It was the first stop in a new life for millions, and the start of countless stories that would come to define the American experience. The journey to America was a monumental one for many immigrants, and it began far before they reached Ellis Island. For most, the trip started in the bustling port cities of Europe, where they boarded steamships bound for New York. The contrast between the different classes aboard these ships could not have been starker. First-class passengers enjoyed luxurious accommodations with fine dining, private rooms, and access to the ship's best amenities. For the majority, however, the experience was drastically different. Immigrants traveled in steerage, the lowest, cheapest class, where they were packed into cramped, unsanitary spaces with little ventilation or privacy. The conditions were harsh, and many would fall ill during the long journey across the Atlantic, which could take anywhere from 10 days to several weeks. Those who made it through the journey, often weary, sick, and anxious, would find that their arrival in New York Harbor was just the beginning of a new set of challenges. As the ship approached the harbor, many immigrants first glimpsed the Statue of Liberty rising in the distance. For some, the sight of Lady Liberty, holding her torch aloft, was a symbol of hope, of freedom, of new beginnings. The moment was filled with anticipation and dreams of a brighter future. But for most, their hopes were tempered by fear and uncertainty. What awaited them at Ellis Island was an entirely different kind of test. Upon arrival at Ellis Island, passengers disembarked onto ferries that carried them to the processing center. The first hurdle they faced was the medical inspection, a procedure that could determine whether they were allowed to stay in the United States or be sent back to their country of origin. The 6-second physical, as it became known, was a quick but invasive exam in which doctors checked for visible signs of illness, disease, or disability. Inspectors scrutinized faces, eyes, and even ears for signs of infection or deformities. Immigrants were often hurried through this process with little more than a glance or a few questions. If an immigrant was suspected of having a contagious disease, they were marked with chalk on their clothing, and more thorough medical exams followed. Many were quarantined or sent to the hospital for further treatment. Some were eventually deported, though medical staff were usually sympathetic, knowing how much was at stake for the immigrants. After medical inspection, the next step was the legal interview. Immigrants were asked a series of questions designed to determine their eligibility to enter the U.S. Did they have family in America? How much money did they have? Were they planning to work or seek employment? Could they read or write? The legal clerks, who often spoke multiple languages, would interpret the questions for immigrants and record their responses. For many, this process was an exhausting and nerve-wracking experience, with long waits and uncertainty hanging over them. The vast majority of immigrants passed these inspections, but for some, the process didn't go so smoothly. Some were detained for further questioning or even sent back to Europe if they couldn't meet the legal requirements. For those who failed the medical exam or were deemed likely to be a public charge, the appeal process could be lengthy, and there were always stories of families being separated, often without explanation. For instance, Irish and Italian immigrants, many of whom arrived in large numbers, found themselves under increased scrutiny due to racial and ethnic prejudices, as well as fears of overcrowding. Amidst the bureaucracy, there were also personal, emotional moments. For many, the sheer exhaustion of the journey and the hope for a better life clouded their vision. Some immigrants, like the Irish who fled famine, arrived eager to reunite with family members already in America. Others, like the Jews escaping pogroms in Eastern Europe, dreamed of a life free from persecution. Polish immigrants searching for economic opportunity sought jobs in factories and mines. And the Chinese, who had already faced significant exclusionary laws, found themselves under even greater suspicion, their experiences complicated by the Chinese Exclusion Act, which severely restricted their entry. But the overwhelming emotion tied to Ellis Island wasn't just fear or frustration, it was hope. Despite the challenges and uncertainty, the promise of a fresh start was powerful. Many immigrants carried personal stories and dreams of a better life that carried them through the harshest days of processing. Diaries and letters from these immigrants often reflected both the hope and the despair of their experience. Some spoke of the joy of seeing loved ones, of starting new businesses, or simply of finding the opportunity to work and build a future for their children. But there were also heartbreaking stories. Some immigrants were forced to turn back after months of anticipation, sent back to their countries with nothing but memories of a dream unfulfilled. Others were separated from family members, spouses or children, who were held up in detention or barred from entering for various reasons. These moments of separation and heartbreak were especially devastating in an era without phones, the internet, or even reliable mail services. The immigrant experience at Ellis Island was as complex and varied as the people who passed through it. Some walked away from the island with new hope and a future in the United States. Others left in despair, marked by the weight of rejection or bureaucratic delays. But for all of them, the island represented a place where hopes were tested and where the promise of a new life in America was either realized or lost. Ellis Island was not just a place of entry, it was a place where futures were forged, dreams shaped, and lives transformed. The myth of Ellis Island is as powerful as its history, and some of the most enduring tales about the island have been exaggerated or misrepresented over time. Let's explore the common myths surrounding Ellis Island and how the reality often tells a different story. Myth 1. Immigrants' names were changed at Ellis Island. One of the most enduring myths about Ellis Island is that immigration officers arbitrarily changed the names of immigrants to make them sound more American. Many people believe that their ancestors were given new names upon arrival, such as Bergman becoming Baker or Schwartz becoming Smith. The truth is, name changes were not the norm at Ellis Island. The idea that Ellis Island clerks changed names on a whim is largely a misconception. While it's true that some immigrants may have had their names recorded incorrectly due to language barriers, poor handwriting, or clerical errors, the process was rarely deliberate. In fact, the clerks at Ellis Island often had difficulty understanding the accents and dialects of immigrants. They were more likely to mishear names than to intentionally change them. In some cases, immigrants themselves, eager to assimilate and avoid discrimination, may have voluntarily altered or Americanized their names once they had arrived in the U.S. But the myth that Ellis Island officials were responsible for this widespread name-changing practice is simply not accurate. Myth 2. Conditions at Ellis Island were hostile and cruel. Another common myth is that Ellis Island was a grim and hostile place, where immigrants were treated harshly and with suspicion. It's easy to imagine the island as a place of endless, bureaucratic nightmares and cold-hearted officials. While it's true that the process of being inspected and questioned could be overwhelming, the conditions were not always hostile. In reality, the majority of immigrants passed through Ellis Island without any major problems. Once medical and legal checks were completed, most immigrants were allowed to enter the United States within a few hours or days. While the inspection process could be daunting, particularly for those who faced language barriers or health issues, the immigration officers themselves were often sympathetic. They were well aware of the difficulties immigrants faced, and many shared a genuine understanding of the hardships that had led people to seek a better life in America. However, Ellis Island was not without its challenges. The medical inspections, while necessary to prevent the spread of diseases, could be invasive and frightening. Immigrants who were found to have a contagious illness like tuberculosis or trachoma were often detained for weeks or even months. Some were sent back to their home countries, never able to see the United States or their family members again. These moments of rejection were incredibly harsh, but they were the exception, not the rule. Myth 3. Immigrants were turned away in large numbers. Another common misconception is that a significant number of immigrants were rejected or turned away at Ellis Island. In truth, about 98% of immigrants who arrived at Ellis Island were allowed to enter the United States. While the immigration process could be grueling and uncertain, the idea that large numbers were turned away is largely a myth. The screening process, though thorough, was not designed to keep immigrants out, but to ensure that they met certain health and legal requirements. That said, some immigrants did face rejection for a variety of reasons. If a person failed the RFI medical inspection or was found to be a likely public charge, meaning they might rely on government assistance, they could be sent back to their country of origin. Some were detained for weeks in quarantine before they were either released or deported. For those who did face rejection, it was often a heartbreaking experience, as it meant returning to the harsh conditions they had fled from. However, these cases were relatively rare, and most immigrants were allowed entry into the U.S. after a brief period of inspection. Myth 4. The American dream was always realized for immigrants, one of the most persistent myths surrounding Ellis Island is that every immigrant who passed through its gates found success and prosperity in the United States. The American dream, the idea that hard work and determination would lead to success, has been a powerful motivator for generations of immigrants. And for some, this dream was indeed realized. Many immigrants found jobs in factories, built businesses, and eventually made a life for themselves and their families in America. However, the reality for many immigrants was far more complex and often less glamorous. The American dream, as it was sold, was not a guarantee. Many immigrants, especially those who arrived from Southern and Eastern Europe, faced significant discrimination and prejudice. They often found themselves working long hours in dangerous conditions for low wages. The promise of upward mobility wasn't always fulfilled, and many struggled with poverty, overcrowded living conditions, and the challenges of assimilation. Moreover, the idea of the American dream also carried a heavy racial and ethnic bias. Immigrants from Western and Northern Europe were often welcomed as part of the American fabric, while those from Southern and Eastern Europe were frequently treated as outsiders or second-class citizens. For Jews, Italians, Poles, and other immigrant groups, the road to acceptance was long and fraught with obstacles. The reality was that while Ellis Island may have represented hope and the possibility of a better life, it was just the beginning of an often difficult journey toward realizing the full promise of America. Many immigrants spent years, even generations, working to build their futures and find their place in a society that was still grappling with questions of identity and inclusion. Ellis Island, in many ways, was a place where myths and realities collided. While it became a symbol of hope and opportunity for millions, the experience of passing through its gates was not always a clear path to success. For many, it was the beginning of a journey that would require as much struggle and resilience as the voyage itself. The decline and closure of Ellis Island is a story intertwined with changing immigration policies, the advent of air travel, and the evolving role of the island itself. By the mid-20th century, several key factors led to Ellis Island's eventual closure in 1954. Let's take a deeper look at how these changes unfolded and what happened to the facility after it closed its doors to immigrants. Shift to more restrictive. Immigration laws 1920s. The 1920s marked a significant turning point for American immigration. The United States began to adopt more restrictive immigration policies, which had a direct impact on Ellis Island. In 1921, the Emergency Quota Act was passed, followed by the Immigration Act of 1924. These laws established strict quotas based on nationality, drastically limiting immigration from certain parts of the world, particularly Southern and Eastern Europe, as well as Asia. The goal of these policies was to favor immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, who were seen as more Americanizable. This period of restriction fundamentally changed the nature of immigration. The large waves of European immigrants that had flooded the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries began to slow. By the 1920s, Ellis Island, which had once processed hundreds of thousands of immigrants each year, was no longer the bustling gateway it had been in its heyday. Air travel ends mass sea immigration. In addition to stricter immigration laws, the rise of air travel in the 1920s and 1930s had a profound effect on the way people entered the United States. Prior to this, steamships were the primary mode of transportation for immigrants, and Ellis Island served as a critical entry point for those arriving by sea. However, with the increasing popularity and affordability of air travel, fewer people needed to make the long, arduous journey by ship. By the 1930s and 1940s, as air travel became more common, the volume of immigrants arriving by sea dramatically decreased. The United States, having become a destination for millions of immigrants, was now seeing a shift toward more efficient means of transportation. This further contributed to the decline of Ellis Island as a primary immigration center. Ellis Island closes in 1954. Ellis Island officially closed its doors as an immigration processing station in 1954, marking the end of an era. The rise of air travel and the sharp reduction in immigration due to restrictive policies had made Ellis Island less necessary. Additionally, by this time, the U.S. government had begun processing immigrants at airports and other facilities, making the island obsolete for its original purpose. The closure of Ellis Island in 1954 was not a sudden event. It had been in the works for some time. The island's operations had already diminished significantly after World War II, as the flow of immigrants had slowed dramatically. During the war, Ellis Island had been repurposed for military use, and after the war ended, the facility continued to operate on a much smaller scale. By the early 1950s, the processing center was officially closed, and the buildings fell into disuse. What happened to the facility afterward? After its closure as an immigration station, Ellis Island's buildings and facilities deteriorated due to neglect. The island, once a vibrant center of immigration, was now largely abandoned, and its structures began to fall into disrepair. At one point, some of the buildings were even considered for demolition. The island's history, which had once been so integral to the American immigrant experience, seemed to be slipping into obscurity. However, the island didn't remain abandoned forever. In the 1960s, efforts began to preserve the historical significance of Ellis Island. The Ellis Island Immigration Museum was established in 1990 as part of a broader effort to recognize and honor the millions of immigrants who had passed through the island. The museum was housed in the old main building, which was restored to reflect the architecture and design of the early 20th century. Today, it serves as a symbol of the nation's immigrant heritage and a testament to the struggles and triumphs of those who came to America seeking a better life. Ellis Island's legacy lives on as a national monument, drawing visitors from around the world who wish to learn about the immigrant experience and pay tribute to the millions who passed through its gates. The museum houses exhibits that provide insights into the history of immigration, featuring personal stories, photographs, and artifacts that showcase the diversity of the people who helped shape the United States. The island's closure in 1954 marked the end of its role as a major immigration processing center, but it also set the stage for its eventual transformation into a historical landmark. Today, Ellis Island stands as a symbol not just of America's immigrant past, but also of the resilience and contributions of generations of people who helped build the nation. Ellis Island today, a symbol and a museum. In the years following its closure in 1954, Ellis Island's future seemed uncertain. The once bustling immigration station had fallen into neglect, with many of its buildings in disrepair. However, by the late 20th century, efforts were made to preserve and restore the island's historical significance, transforming it into a powerful symbol of the American immigrant experience. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan signed legislation designating Ellis Island as part of the Statue of Liberty National Monument, recognizing its critical role in American history. Restoration efforts began soon after, aiming to bring back its original architectural charm while preserving the island's rich historical legacy. The project culminated in 1990 when the Ellis Island Immigration Museum officially opened its doors to the public. This museum was not just a restoration of the island's buildings, but a heartfelt tribute to the millions of immigrants who had passed through its gates. National Immigration Museum, Archives and Stories. Today, Ellis Island stands as a national immigration museum, housing an extensive collection of artifacts, documents, and personal stories from the immigrants who made their journey to America. The museum showcases the history of immigration to the United States, emphasizing the vital role that Ellis Island played as a gateway for millions of people seeking a better life. Inside the museum, visitors can explore exhibits dedicated to various immigrant groups, including Irish, Italian, Jewish, Polish, Chinese, and more. These exhibits feature photographs, letters, diaries, and personal belongings that tell the stories of individuals who passed through Ellis Island. The museum also highlights the challenges faced by immigrants during their journey and the process of being inspected at the island. One of the most compelling aspects of the museum is the Wall of Honor, where the names of immigrants who passed through Ellis Island are inscribed. Visitors can search for the names of their ancestors in the museum's database, allowing them to trace their family history and connect with their roots. The Wall of Honor serves as a powerful reminder of the millions who contributed to shaping America's diverse society. The museum also features interactive displays that provide visitors with the opportunity to experience what it might have been like to undergo the medical inspections and legal interviews that immigrants faced. These hands-on exhibits give a sense of the tension and hope that marked the immigrant experience. How descendants trace their ancestry. Ellis Island holds particular significance for the descendants of immigrants who passed through its gates. For many people, visiting the island is a deeply personal journey, allowing them to connect with the history of their ancestors in a tangible way. The museum offers a genealogy center that helps individuals trace their family roots. The center provides access to a wealth of resources, including records from the Ellis Island Passenger Database, which includes detailed information on over 22 million immigrants who arrived at the island between 1892 and 1924. Using these records, descendants can track the names, ages, origins, and even the ships their ancestors arrived on. Many visitors are moved to find their great-grandparents or other relatives listed in the historical documents. For those who may not have concrete family records, the Genealogy Center's staff provides guidance and assistance in navigating the archives, helping visitors uncover their family's past. In recent years, online databases have made it even easier for descendants to trace their ancestors' immigration journeys. The Ellis Island Foundation's website offers free access to the records, allowing people around the world to search for family members who came through the island. This has created a global network of individuals sharing stories, discovering their roots, and building a collective memory of the immigrant experience. Footage of exhibits and visitor testimonials. The museum has become one of the most visited historical sites in the United States, attracting millions of visitors each year. Through footage of the exhibits and visitor testimonials, we can see the profound emotional impact Ellis Island continues to have on people today. Many visitors express a deep sense of pride and awe as they walk through the exhibits, seeing firsthand the struggles and triumphs of their ancestors. For some, it's an emotional journey, as they reflect on the courage it took for their family members to leave their homes and start anew in a foreign land. Visitor testimonial number 1. I found my great-grandfather's name. One visitor, Sarah, shared her experience. I had heard the stories of my great-grandfather coming through Ellis Island, but I never thought I'd actually find his name. When I searched the records and saw his name listed, it felt like a part of my family history clicked into place. I never knew how much this place would mean to me until I stood here and realized that my family's story began right here. Visitor testimonial, Tharker 2, a tribute to our heritage. Another visitor, Juan, said, I came here with my family to show my children the history of our ancestors. They were from Italy, and to know that they walked through these very doors just like so many others makes me feel so proud. Ellis Island isn't just a museum for me. It's a tribute to the strength and perseverance of everyone who came to America for a better life. The museum is more than just a place to learn about history. It is a place where personal connections are made and the immigrant experience is honored. Through exhibits, archival materials, and personal stories, Ellis Island remains a symbol of hope, resilience, and the ongoing quest for a better life that continues to shape America's identity today. As a monument to the struggles and successes of immigrants, Ellis Island serves as a testament to the power of the American dream, and a place where those who pass through its gates will never be forgotten. Legacy and cultural impact. Ellis Island's legacy extends far beyond its role as a processing station for immigrants arriving in the United States. It has become a symbol of American diversity, resilience, and the pursuit of the American dream. The island not only played a pivotal role in shaping the early 20th century immigrant experience, but continues to influence the identity and cultural fabric of the United States today. How Ellis Island shaped American diversity. The millions of immigrants who passed through Ellis Island, from Irish, Italian, and Jewish immigrants to Polish, Chinese, and many others, helped to form the foundation of America's multicultural society. Each group brought with it unique traditions, languages, and skills that enriched the nation's social, cultural, and economic life. From the music of Eastern European Jews to the food traditions of Italian immigrants, Ellis Island marked the beginning of a new life in America for individuals whose descendants would later shape the country in countless ways. The island symbolizes the nation's commitment to openness and opportunity, even as it faced challenges related to racism, nativism, and exclusionary policies. Despite these obstacles, immigrants who passed through Ellis Island contributed immeasurably to the nation's economic growth, technological innovations, and cultural enrichment. Contribution of immigrant families to U.S. society. Immigrant families who arrived at Ellis Island made significant contributions to virtually every facet of American life. Many immigrants worked in factories, helping to fuel the Industrial Revolution. Others settled in cities, starting small businesses or becoming workers in the growing service and trade industries. Immigrant labor was crucial in constructing America's infrastructure, railroads, bridges, and skyscrapers, and helped transform the nation into an industrial powerhouse. In the arts, immigrants contributed to the cultural renaissance of America, with writers, musicians, and visual artists shaping the country's identity. The literary contributions of Jewish American authors, the jazz music popularized by African American and immigrant musicians, and the growth of Hollywood with the influx of immigrants from Eastern Europe and Italy all left indelible marks on American culture. Additionally, immigrant families brought new ideas and skills, from architecture to labor movements, and were instrumental in creating labor unions, advancing civil rights, and advocating for better working conditions. Their political activism helped shape the country's progressive movements throughout the 20th century. Lasting symbolism of Ellis Island in movies, books, and American identity. Ellis Island is woven into the fabric of American culture, appearing in numerous movies, books, and documentaries that explore the immigrant experience. The island's symbolism is so powerful that it has been used to represent both the hopes and struggles of immigrants. In films like The Godfather and Gangs of New York, the arrival of immigrants at Ellis Island serves as a backdrop for larger themes of identity, survival, and the transformation of America. These depictions resonate with audiences worldwide, highlighting the struggles of individuals in search of a better life and the harsh realities of the immigrant journey. Books like The Immigrant by Howard Fast and The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson also explore the immigrant experience and the legacy of Ellis Island. These narratives, along with countless personal stories passed down through generations, reflect the courage, resilience, and sacrifices made by those who sought freedom and opportunity in America. Beyond the silver screen and literary world, Ellis Island has become an enduring symbol in the American identity, representing both the promise and the complexity of the nation's immigrant history. It serves as a reminder of the country's roots as a nation built by immigrants, and the island itself has become a site of pilgrimage for many who wish to honor their ancestors and connect with the broader story of America. Reflection on today's immigration debates. Lessons from the past. The legacy of Ellis Island continues to resonate in today's debates about immigration in the United States. The struggles faced by immigrants in the early 20th century, ranging from discrimination and exclusion to long waits and challenging working conditions, echo the challenges faced by many immigrants today. Despite differences in the methods of arrival, the essence of the immigrant experience remains the same: a search for a better life, driven by the hope of opportunities not available in one's homeland. As the nation grapples with current debates over immigration reform, border security, and the treatment of undocumented immigrants, the lessons of Ellis Island remain relevant. The island served as a symbol of the hope immigrants carried with them, even as they faced immense hardships. It also represented the openness of the United States, welcoming people from all corners of the globe to build a new life. However, the challenges faced by immigrants today, whether through legal barriers, xenophobia, or the difficulties of adjusting to a new culture, show that the struggles for immigrant rights are far from over. The experiences of Ellis Island offer important lessons on empathy, fairness, and the importance of a compassionate and just immigration system. In reflecting on today's immigration challenges, it's clear that the need for a balanced approach, one that both recognizes the human dignity of immigrants and addresses the complexities of modern immigration systems, remains as critical as ever. Ellis Island, once a symbol of hope and opportunity, serves as a reminder that the path toward a just and inclusive society requires ongoing effort and dialogue. In conclusion, Ellis Island's legacy is not just one of a historical landmark or an old processing station. It is a symbol of the values that have shaped American society: diversity, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of the American dream. The contributions of immigrants who passed through the island continue to be felt in every aspect of life in America, from the economy to the arts, and they shape the nation's identity to this day. The story of Ellis Island reminds us that while the struggles of immigration are ongoing, they are also part of a long history of hope and transformation. Conclusion: as we reflect on the history of Ellis Island, we remember the millions of immigrants who passed through its gates, each carrying with them the hopes and dreams of a better life in America. From the early days of Ellis Island's operation to its role today as a symbol of the American immigrant experience, the island stands as a powerful reminder of the resilience, determination, and sacrifices of those who sought a future in this country. The story of Ellis Island is one of both struggle and hope, struggles faced by immigrants in a new land, but also the hope that they could build something better for themselves and their families. Every person who passed through those gates left an indelible mark on the story of America. Whether they found prosperity or hardship, their journey shaped the nation's identity, building the diverse society we know today. Emma Lazarus's poem, "The New Colossus," etched on the Statue of Liberty, encapsulates the spirit of Ellis Island perfectly. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. This powerful message of hope and opportunity resonates today as strongly as it did over a century ago. It reminds us that America is, and always has been, a land that welcomes those seeking a better life, immigrants who contribute to the nation's ever-evolving story. Call to action: if you have ancestors who passed through Ellis Island, we'd love to hear their stories. Share them in the comments and join in honoring the generations that came before. And if you haven't yet had the chance, consider visiting the Ellis Island Museum or exploring their virtual tours to immerse yourself in the rich history of immigration and the legacy of those who shaped America.